about video games necessarily in the same way that we talk about books or movies.
There's that thing of, oh shit, when are video games going to grow up? You know, the perception is they're still played by kids, and but I played them when I was a kid, but now I'm a man in my 30s with 2 kids, and the average age of a video gamer is like in the 35.
Yeah,
right? So
you're the demographic. Well, I'm saying
totally
we're the demographic, and there's a lot of money behind that as well. So you're Ollie K.
So to keep things super confusing, so
Yeah.
I'm Ollie K. I'm the associate creative director at a studio called All Seeing Eye.
Mm-hmm.
That over there is Ollie Lindsay, who's the
Right.
creative director.
Okay,
so
great.
Ollie and I have All Seeing Eye. The studio is relatively new. It's only been around since it was founded November last year, 2016. Ollie used to run another agency, and he left that and started a new one, and I went with him to make this,
Cool.
this new thing. But we've
Cool.
worked together for 7 years or something. And,
Awesome.
we're a really small team, so there's only
Yeah.
like 4 of us. But we've all worked together in previous roles.
How did you get into developing Beyond? How did that come about?
So, a few years ago, maybe longer than that, Ollie and the other director at the company had a idea for a game that would maybe be a kid's iPad game in the vein of Tokaboka or something like that would basically allow kids to mix together plants in interesting ways. So you can make a rose bush that grows pineapples or something like that. And it'd be kind of a fun and just like drag and droppy kind of game on iPad. A little while ago, when the call for developing Beyond came out, the theme was what was the theme? The theme was transformations. I can't remember what the theme was.
That's okay.
The theme was transformations, and it was like, well, that kind of idea we had for a game was interesting. Let's pitch it and see what happens. And at All Seeing Eye, as a company, what we do is we make we use technology and art to bring together to make interesting interactive work. So we typically do a lot of work with theatres like the National Theatre and people like that. Recently took a piece called Draw Me Close to Venice Film Festival and Tribeca Film Festival, did very well. But using technology in an innovative performance way which has not been used before. So we're very experienced in using tech. And we thought, like working VR, so we'll pitch a virtual reality concept for that, and we were lucky enough to be one of the 6 teams who were chosen to go through, and we got a small amount of funding. I think it was $15,000, I think, to make a kind of early prototype. And a couple of months ago, we went to those prototypes were judged at Develop Brighton, and 3 of the teams were knocked out, but we were lucky enough to be 3 of the teams who got through to the final here. So I think in mid-January there's the teams are again judged, and I think the first team gets $150,000 and it ranks down like that. So
awesome. Fingers crossed.
Oh, indeed, yeah, everything's crossed.
What's Seed actually about then?
So Seed is it's a virtual reality game that allows you to breed, grow, and kind of hack plants.
Right.
It's based on an idea that our researcher we're collaborating with, Helen and Curry from Cambridge, told us about of garage biotech. So a whole huge movement that started in the 40s, 50s, 60s of people growing and hacking plants in their garages and sheds, amateurs, in the same way that people were into model rocketry or CB radios. There's a whole people who are just tinkering with plants in their sheds. So that's what our game is about, and it allows you to mix plants together in new and interesting ways.
Yeah.
Interesting thing it does that is, I think, maybe unique to what we're doing, is that all the plants in our game are completely procedural.
Right,
so rather than it being a 3D model that we've like, oh, it's a sunflower, and it grows out, the way that the plants look, the way that they behave, the way that they grow is completely governed by the attributes that define them. And that gets more interesting, more complex when you start to mix plant A with plant B, and then the plant that comes out of that is a mixture of those attributes. And winding into that, there's also recessive and dominant characteristics and traits, and it quickly becomes very complicated. But that's what's really kind of interesting about this game for us. But that the idea of there being procedural plants, it's really relevant that it's in VR. It could be on a screen or whatever, but it's in VR because we're really fascinated by the medium, the storytelling opportunities it presents. And I'm just going to go start this game.
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. There you go.
Where was I?
So using VR as a medium.
So VR, it's just a fascinating new way to tell stories and immerse people in a new place. And we feel that this game, one of the things that works so well about it is that you can just reach out and start interacting with the environment. And we're trying to make a sandbox which allows you to just play. And it's a nice workshopy kind of environment that's kind of soft and gentle and a warm place to be rather than being threatening. It's a mindful experience that allows people to sort of just tinker and play with plants. And
just
I think tinkering is a really key word in what we want it to be. It's about sort of like, play with it personally.
So, I mean, there's a lot of talk in the industry at the minute about emergent gameplay experiences and things like that. Is this along those lines, in that you don't necessarily know as the developer what people are going to come up with?
Absolutely. So it's fascinating that in this demo that we're showing today, we have I believe 6 kind of what we're calling core or starter seeds, which are in the drawer, and you pull them out. There's a red one, a green one, a blue one, whatever. But as soon as they mix them together, I don't have a clear picture in my head of what that plant's going to look like. As soon as they're 2 generations away, 3 generations away, 10 generations away, I have no idea what that plant's going to look like. We have kind of things where, so there's a drawer that has radioactive clocks in it, and you can hold a seed over that, and that will irradiate the clock. Right. They'll irradiate the seed and change the branching properties of it. And that's kind of taken from the people, a guy in the late 50s who was scraping the radium off watch faces and using that to mutate his rosebuds.
Wow. Okay.
And it's kind of a weird, crazy story that you wouldn't think is true, but this is a thing that a guy was doing in his garage somewhere. And it's just a fascinating little story which has become a kind of mechanic of the game, but we're not using it in the same way. There's a thread that connects the fact of what happened, where we've kind of extrapolated it to make a gameplay mechanic which works in the context of our experience.
One last quick question. So you've been working with Helen
Ann Curry.
Is she a scientist?
So she's a researcher at Cambridge, and her research is in the history of plant breeding, the history of seed banks, and kind of broadly history of science.
How have you found that experience of working with somebody in academia?
It's been great. I mean, like I was just explaining the radium clock thing. We didn't come to the game thinking, okay, we've got to have a way to mutate plants.
Yeah.
It was speaking to her, she said, so one of the things people have done that was kind of crazy is they used radiation, and the funniest way that I can think of someone did that is they scraped the radium off the clocks, and we're like, that's a bit mental, that's crazy. Awesome. That's awesome, but as soon as someone tells you that, like the storytelling possibilities, you go, oh, that's just fascinating, and how that can become a mechanic of the game. So the whole of the setting and what the game is just comes straight from her idea of garage biotech.
Yeah.
And the types of activities you're asking people to do in the game, and the ways that the kind of loop of the game, in the sense that you mix together seeds, grow a seed, harvest that seed, then mix that seed with another one. That's the science fundamentally of how plant breeding works.
Yeah. And
that's where we're kind of taking it from. But we're working in a amateur's workshop as opposed to a professional's plant lab that's sterile and clean.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the very clear kind of direction that we've gone with our aesthetic and the way that we approach our types of interactions in the game.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to run off.
No,
but
please.
Thank you. That's great. I'm going to come back later and have a go if that's okay.
I think it finishes like 3 or something. Come down.